Hey guys, today I'm going to finish restoring the brakes on my 356. These brake calipers were taken apart a few weeks ago and they've since been plated. These are professionally plated, they look great. So we're going to put them together today. I'm going to show you how to assemble these brakes and get them fully restored. Check it out. These were disassembled a few weeks ago. Remember, the pistons were stuck in there. You know, these have been sitting on the shelf for probably 10, almost 15 years. Just like with restoring any old part on an old classic car, it's mostly about cleaning and preparation. And so there's no difference here with the brake caliper. They're a pretty simple device, but requires tons of cleaning. I'm going to show you what I'm doing to the bolts. I'm going to reuse the original bolts, but they're black oxide plated, and some of those bolts need a little bit of attention. This solution is from Caswell, and I'm just mixing up a new batch. This is the black oxide treatment, and I'm mixing it 9 parts to 1 part solution with distilled water. While the bolts are soaking, let me show you the rebuild parts that came. So all new seals and gaskets and retaining clips. Also, I had ordered some new bridge pipes. Bridge pipe goes from here to here on the lower side, and then the bleed ports go on the upper side. I was pretty disappointed with the quality. They didn't even match front to rear. The rears were like a black tubing. The front was a silver tubing, but it had gold ends on it. So nothing was actually correct on those. So I think what I'm going to do is remake my own bridge pipes. Here's what they look like. This is the original one. It's just a brake line. This is the double din flare. It has a little piece of rubber here to prevent it from vibrating up against the caliper. Getting the sharp bend right next to the fitting is somewhat difficult. I had the original fittings replated. This is the correct color. This is the clear zinc. That's the way they were, even though the calipers are gold. The fittings were clear zinc. And I made, out of a piece of wood, I drilled some holes in it, and actually it's more than that. These are hex-shaped holes. I used a CNC machine because I was there for another project. So this fits inside there like that. Actually, I'll probably put it in the other way, but I got to finish drilling through. So that's going to help hold the end of the line. And then I'm going to make another little piece of tooling that's going to let me bend it to get that really sharp 90-degree bend. I also replated the original brake bleeders. The original bridge pipe is a diameter of 186. And this replacement tubing, this was just from the auto parts store, 3/16 tubing, is 186. It's the same stuff. The plating might be slightly different than it was in the 60s, but it's good enough for me. This is the fitting, slides right on there, so that's going to work out well. It's probably going to take me several iterations to get the length right, so I'm going to start documenting the length before I bend it and before I flare it. 210 millimeters. Because these are perfectly symmetrical, I think it makes sense to start in the middle and work my way out. I'm just going to eyeball the first two bends, mark it with the original tubing. That's probably the center. And the first bend starts right here. Second bend right there. So try those. Nope, a little more. I think it's to that line right there. Yeah. So next time I do this, I will measure these marks and I'm going to cheat them in probably 1/16 of an inch and just keep getting better at it. To flare the end of the tubing, I'm going to use this Eastwood tubing flaring kit for brake lines. And so you just slide the ferrule on first, just clamp it into the die lightly at first, and then there's something called Operation Zero. So you go Operation Zero, and what that does is it makes the end of the brake line flush with the die. Now you clamp it together tight, and then you switch over to DIN. That's what this is called. This is the DIN die. Just till it stops. And that's how it looks. Okay, so this end goes inside here. Just pokes through just a tiny bit. So that fits in there nice, and then I'm gonna be bending it this way. So the next thing I did is I just took this into the other side of my garage, and I just, on the bench grinder, I just rolled this radius right here. It's about the same sharp radius. So the plan is to do this. I'm just going to bend it right over. So I'm going to screw this down onto here, and that's going to prevent this from coming out, because the way this fits flush, that's going to keep the nut down. Boom. But that is very, very close. I think it's probably off, like the same as before, probably half a tube. So all I have to do now is I'll just grind or file this a little bit flatter or a little bit deeper. I made this groove quite a bit deeper, so I think now it's going to, make a sharper bend and keep it a little closer. So one problem is this runs into itself, so I just need to cut that off. Okay, that's as far as it'll bend down. There's just a tiny bit of spring back, so it won't go the full 90, but I can just do the last few degrees by hand, no problem. The last bend on this, I don't know if you can tell, but there's one bend, two bends, and then there's a third bend. So in this plane, this part here kind of folds in. I think that's for a little bit of extra tire clearance or wheel clearance. So we just need to find a way to clamp that. Probably bend that by hand. So I'm going to take a little distance out of that. The height on this is pretty close, very close actually. And then I did put this extra bend right here just with my vise. I'll record that on the next one, but here's how I did it. When I clamp this in the vise, I just bend it by hand, and these reliefs in here prevent it from collapsing the tube. So I'm going to go to the auto parts store, look for some of this tubing. I think it's like vacuum tubing or something, but I'm going to take it with me and see what we can find. Good chance to take Mac out for a ride. these have a few more minutes to go. I'm just kind of shaking them around. There's a lot in there. The second step to this Caswell process is something called penetrating sealant for black oxide, also from Caswell. It's like an oil, some mil spec here. That should be it for these chemicals. And so I'm just I use this funnel and a paint strainer so I don't lose any pieces. Put the solution back in for next time. Anyone else in there? So they are sort of re-blackened. I'm gonna let these dry a little bit here in the funnel, and then we'll pat them dry, get them in the oil. Hopefully that's a good enough of a touch-up on the black oxide. I don't think this black oxide is as good as the factory black oxide. Okay, new filter, and then this will go right back into the oil. So I'm just lightly, spraying this stuff with oil, kind of shake it around a little bit. Got the correct size tubing. It's a very close match, 7/32 vacuum tubing. You can barely see the little grooves there in the wood. That's what it sort of bends around. It's not really a sharp corner. It fits really pretty tight up against the caliper now. It's not touching, but it's, this is still sliding around a little bit. I might have to use a little bit of adhesive on this just so it doesn't go too far off. I think it's finally time to assemble. These were painted with caliper paint and they dried overnight. So take the masking tape off. So these are very clean, ultrasonically cleaned. This is the original one. Who knows if the retractor things still work, but it is kind of nice to have the original pieces back in there. The main hydraulic seal is done on this surface, and this surface has no pitting in it, no rust or anything on it. This is nice and pristine. And then that seal will go inside this channel right here, which is also very clean. A lot of care taken to do that. These pistons have a orientation. So the pressure is exerted on this diameter right here, but there's a relief on the lower section. So if this is 12 o'clock, right about 6:30 and 11:30 is a depressed area between here. And that has to do with the way the leading and trailing edge of the brake pad actually get sort of torqued when you apply the brakes, because the brake pad has a certain thickness that gets torqued from the rotor. So the piston here, the shape of the piston is designed to counteract that torque on the brake pad. There is a tool in the factory workshop manual that tells you where to orient the piston correctly. So we're going to be following those instructions. So I just printed out a triangle with a 20-degree angle. This part of the piston that's surfaced lower faces the direction of the rotation of the rotor. So I want to face the depressed part of the piston facing down. That's in the direction of rotation of the disc. So I'm using a little bit of this red rubber grease. This is compatible with brake fluid, and it's there to keep things lubricated, also prevent corrosion, I believe. So I'm just going to use a very light amount on this, certainly on the rubber. So that's my guide. I'm just going to turn it just like that. Go ahead and push this all the way down. This is 20 degrees lined up against that horizontal surface. And then there are the marks, just like that. Now the first thing I notice is the kit that I got has this wire retainer, and it's a rounded shape. It's not the same as the factory one. Let me show you that one. Hopefully you can see this, but this one is a very different profile. It's actually much taller and it's squared off. The question becomes, when your brake pads wear and the piston comes further out, is it going to take the seal with it and the retaining ring with it? Hopefully not. That's something I will keep my eye on for sure, but it does appear to work. Okay, just because I'm reusing the bolts doesn't mean you have to. The manual does say to use new bolts. These should be torqued according to the workshop manual, so I will look those torque specs up, but it might actually be easier to do that when this is mounted on the car, just so it's easier to hold on to using these two big bolts. And switch to the flare nut wrench now. Pins are replated. Yeah, here's something interesting. I just realized these are new pads and they have arrows on them with a special cutout to, I think, do the same thing the piston already does. So the original pads I removed from here, I mean, I'm sure they're not original to the car, but this doesn't have the same feature. So if the piston already has that feature built in, I'm not sure why there's this extra plate. This plate's pretty thick too. So I need to investigate a little bit about why that has it. Is this for replacement pistons that don't have the feature cut into it? So that's a little weird to me. This is the retainer that holds the brake pads in place. I'm going to replace this with something newer. I think this is supposed to be the bright zinc plating, so it's probably been replaced at some point, which is fine. Just going to try to make these brakes as correct as possible. So I'll look for the correct pads and also the correct retainer clip. All right, so there it is. It's completely assembled, not for the final time. Still needs a little bit of torquing, little sealant there, correct pads, and replace this spring, but looks pretty good. Also, the kit only came with one of the bleeder caps. I'm not sure why there's not two. Let's put it on the car and see how it looks. Well, it's just bolted on here temporarily. Clearly, we need the hub and the rotor to complete this front assembly. But here's how it looks. Just want to make sure that there's no interference, especially with this lower bridge pipe. You can see how it fits right below this caliper right up to the dust shield. So that kind of creates a nice little buffer there so nothing rides against the brake line. But everything looks to me to be pretty nice. Pretty happy with that. So it looks great. I just got to do the other three. I'm not going to bore you guys with all the repetitive details, but thanks again for watching. Hopefully something resonated with you, a new tip or technique, or it's just kind of the struggles of working on old cars and getting reproduction parts that really aren't the same as the original quality and so forth. So I do my best. And if you'd like to support the channel, feel free to join Patreon. That's a subscription service between $1 and $5 a month. Or you can also look in the description below. I usually provide a link of some tool I used, like for instance, the Eastwood flaring tool. That is something that I've recommended in the past. It's a tool that I bought myself. Eastwood did not supply it to me. However, if you click on my link from Amazon, I'll get like a small commission if you buy either that tool or, for that matter, anything on Amazon within, I think, 24 hours from checking it out. So that's another way to support me. I know this content is free for you, and if you'd like to give back, I totally appreciate it. If not, that's fine too. Have a good weekend. Happy Memorial Day weekend, and we'll see you next Saturday.